Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today we are taking a look at Death's Wind. This is my new iteration of the build that I created last update of the Warden, I guess you could say. But it is a Warden build, and yes, it is a Nord, and I chose this particularly for one reason: the Nord's damage reduction. I know a lot of people consider the Nord's damage reduction as an inconsistency. It doesn't stack well with other damage reductions, but it actually works really well with this build for some reason. It actually mitigates a lot more damage than you would think with all the other mitigation you have. So we'll get into that in a second. I just want to kind of go over the stats first, and we'll get into the gear and then the skills and then CP and all that together will explain why this build works the way it does. So starting with the stats, as you can see, Nord Warden, we are sitting at a decent pool of stats. We'll get to that in a second, but we do have 4 in the Magicka. The 4 in the Magicka just puts us at that 20k mark in Magicka, which is kind of where we want to be for this build to work. We have a 60 in the stamina, sorry, to give us this 28k stamina. We do have a 32k health, and that's just from wearing an armor set bonus, so I'll get to that in a second. We also have an 893 magic recovery, which is really decent and is highly needed for this build, so we'll get to that too. Weapon damage is sitting at 2048. Not where I'd ideally like it, but it's in a good place. And that's what makes this build so interesting, is it's a really amazing off-tank build, more than it is a main tank, and you'll see why I say that. So 25% spell critical with a 31% weapon critical. The spell critical does play on the ice abilities that we do use, but you don't need a super high spell crit as you do weapon crit. So, and I'll get to that in a second. Next, we have 22k in spell resistance and a 21 physical resist. This goes up to about 25k when we're completely buffed up, which is fairly decent. Alright, moving on down. We are using the Lady Mundus Stone. We are a lycanthrope, but that's because of the... this update is all about werewolves, so we automatically get this in our template, but you don't have to be a werewolf. We are using Tri-Stat food. So that is a super important thing, and we are using Tri-Stat pots for the extra Magicka stamina and health that it gives you, but mainly for the recovery purposes. You will be using these off cooldown, mainly to give you 1,000 something extra recovery whenever you pop a pot. Like I said, longfin pasty and melon sauce food. This gives us the best amount of resources for health, magic, and stamina. And then going over the sets, as always with most of my Warden builds, we are using the Ice Heart set, medium helm, heavy shoulders. And the reason I go with this combination is because I've tried a lot of different combinations and to get good resistances, and I find this to be the best combo for this setup. Now, when you're playing a two-handed tank, just to let you know, you are going to want to use mostly reinforced and Nirnhoned gear with infused traits for yourself, because the infused traits will give you boosted stats, and the reinforced and Nirnhoned will boost your resistances. Because you don't have a sword and shield to block with, you need that resistances to mitigate damage, and you need damage shields to help mitigate damage in order to tank properly with a two-handed weapon or with the two-handed sword. Axe or maul, whatever you choose. So let's go over the traits real quick. As you can see on the helm, we are using infused. We are going to get into the next set here in a second. We are using a reinforced heavy shoulder. You want to use reinforced because it's going to give you the better amount of resistances for heavy armor, so I go with reinforced. It works out better. Going on to the next set. The next set we're using is a crafted set, and this is the weapons, the chest, the legs, and the belt. We are using the Night Mothers set. Now, I know a lot of people are like, Night Mothers is a solo thing. It's not. It's actually really good for tanks that use two-handed weapons, especially if you have no way of applying major fracture. You don't really have to worry too much about Major Breach because your healers can apply that for the group, for the Magicka DPS or whatever, and they can keep it up just as well as you can keep up this on an enemy. Now, this set, the way it works is when you deal critical damage, you apply Major Fracture to the enemy that reduces their physical resistance by 5,280, which helps your stamina DPS get more damage out of it. It also helps you with your damage as well, because we build for weapon damage for a purpose, and I'll get to that in a second. So with this, we also get the infused on these two pieces. On the belt, you're going to go Nirnhoned, because it's a light armor piece, and you want to get the most resistances out of it, and the only way you can do that is doing Nirnhoned. So this takes it up to an 824 resistance, which is a lot better than 500 and something. Alright, so moving on to the other set that we're using, the last and final set, we are using Plague Doctors. Now, in a trial setting, you don't have to have both tanks running Aben in most of the trials. In most of the trials, you can get away with you running Plague Doctors. So that helps you out with getting those max health stats and giving you that healing received. You really need that healing received to make this build something worthwhile. So we have both the gauntlets and the boots, and both of them are kind of easy to get. You can get most of, I think you can get the boots and the gauntlets from doing dungeons, or sorry, the, now I gotta think of what they're called. But you can do them from doing any of the instances in the area where this set drops. And just fighting the last boss in those delves. So you can get these in delves pretty easily. And that's why I set it up this way, is because this is easy to get. The jewelry can be gotten at the dolmens, and you want to go Trirune on 2 of the pieces and 1 of them infused. The reason you want to go Trirune and infused is because the infused is going to boost that magic recovery that you need, and then the 2 Trirunes are going to give you just a little bit of extra health, magic, and stamina that this build needs. So I'm also going to go over the way I have the glyphs set up real quick. So we have 3 tri-stats in the big pieces, and in the smaller pieces it's kind of set up a little different. Over here we have a stamina and magicka, because if you look, they give 351 magicka and stamina. So these give you more, almost as much as this does, in this setup. But if you were using these over here, you would get a lot less. So I went with this to give me more. So I run 2 stamina. As you can see, I have a stamina here and a stamina here, and then a magicka, and then the rest are Trirune, or tri-stat. And again, why I did that, to boost my stats. So, yeah, works out really well. Moving on again to the jewelry, we do have 2 weapon damage and then the magic recovery. For the weapon damage is there to boost one of our abilities, shields. So we'll get to that in a second. And then moving on to the weapons, we are using 2 infused weapons with weakening enchants. Now the reason I chose weakening enchants is when you play a Warden, you get a lot of chilled status effect applied to enemies, which applies minor maim, which reduces the enemy's damage by a lot, and then using this also reduces their damage by a lot. So it just allows you to put a lot of damage reduction on the enemy. So it reduces their outgoing damage against you. So it makes your damage reduction that much more viable. So that's why we go with this setup. And we do run weakening enchants on both weapons, and both of them are infused. Alright, so that's the gear. Now we're going to go and take a look at the skills. On the skills, make sure you unlock all your passives. It's really important to get all your class passives, because some of your class passives are going to play into this really well, some are not. Weapons, you want the 2-handed passives, all of them. And then moving on to armor. Light armor, you're going to want the top 3 passives, and the main reason why you want the top 3 is the recovery. This gives you 4% magic recovery, this gives you 2% reduced cost in magic abilities, and this gives you 386 extra spell resist. Moving on to medium armor, you want the top 2 and the bottom one. The top 2 mainly for the weapon crit. A little bit of extra weapon crit goes a long way. Also the bonus to stam recovery. and the reduced stamina costs. Down here we have athletics, which also gives us a reduced dodge roll cost, and it gives us increased movement speed, or increased movement speed bonus of sprint. So that's kind of nice when we got to get through those dungeons, we're trying to rush them or whatever. Moving on to heavy armor, all passives. World skills, of course, I always go with the soul magic. You can be a vampire with this build, but it's not going to be something I would suggest. It's not going to be as viable. Moving on to guild, Fighters Guild, you just need that really banish the wicked for the ultimate gen, and then intimidating presence if you can get it, or if you want it, and then presence of will over here, and magic controller, because you do use inner light on the back bar. I'll get to that in a second. Psijic order, you're going to want to get deep thoughts. This is going to be a skill you will use on the bar, but you're going to want to fill out all of the things here, because if you don't like using deep thought, there is other abilities here that you can use, like time stop or imbue weapon, or even accelerate, to make this build work out a little bit better. And then moving on to Undaunted, you are going to want to get Inner Beast. This is going to be your main primary taunt, and then Undaunted Command and Undaunted Metal. Moving on to the Alliance War. Assault skill line, you're going to get Aggressive Warhorn, and then make sure you fill out all your racial passives. That's very important. And then on the crafting, Alchemy, Medicinal Use, and then Provisioning, Gourmand, and Connoisseur. Alright, so let's go over the skills we have on the bar. And you're going to notice we have a lot of Magicka abilities, but we have a kind of a low Magicka pool, but don't stress it. You just have to be very cautious on how you use your Magicka abilities. So starting with the first ability we have on our bar, we have Brawler here. Now this does physical damage up front. It does do a little bit of damage over time, but we're not really concerned about the damage over time or the damage up front. This is here for the damage shield. As you can see, the damage shield itself does 2,996 damage shield for 8 seconds, and it increases based on the amount of enemies hit. That's why I said this works better for off-tanking than main tanking. Off-tanking, you get greater chance of doing damage and attacking and fighting. So this gives you that chance to apply the use of this ability to give you mitigation. So it's really, really good. Next up we have Arctic Blast, and Arctic Blast is a heal. It heals you for 16% of your max health and an additional 10% over 10 seconds. And then on top of that, it also does magic or ice damage to your enemies. As you can see, it does 1770 frost damage every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. This can be boosted by your CP, and I'll get to that in a second. Next up, we have Gripping Shards. Now, again, this does frost damage. It also does damage, so it does damage over time, but it also reduces movement speed by 30% for 3 seconds, and it also immobilizes enemies for 3 seconds. So that's kind of a nice thing. And the damage is based off of your max health. So, and also with this ability. Both these abilities are based off of max health. Now, the nice thing about those abilities is if you look in Winter's Embrace, you get Frozen Armor, and you get the Icy Aura, and then Glacier Presence. All these are really good for this, and then Piercing Cold helps as well. But this increases your chance of applying Chill to enemies with Winter Embrace abilities by 200%. So it's like basically in applying Charge to your abilities here, these two abilities, which means you have a greater chance of applying Chilled, which applies that minor maim. Icy Armor for each piece or each skill that's based on this line in your thing gives you greater resistances. So when you're on this bar, you actually get a lot more than when you're on this bar. And so you're going to be on this bar quite a bit. Next, you get Icy Aura, which reduces effectiveness of snares applied to you by 15%. So it reduces their length of time, so it allows you for greater maneuverability. And then Piercing Cold. So moving on through the front bar, we have Arctic Blast, of course, Gripping Shards, and then we have Shimmering Shield. Now, Shimmering Shield is a very powerful damage shield, but it's something that you're only going to be using in areas where you're going to be getting hit by projectiles. Now, this will give you major heroism for 6 seconds, granting you 3 ultimate every 1.5 seconds. So it's just a really good way to generate a little bit of extra ultimate, because you don't have Heroic Strike. Next up, we have Deep Thoughts. Now, Deep Thoughts is here for recovery. When you use this ability, it gives you 1,669 health, 1,914 magic and stamina every second for as long as you have it active. But while it's active, you also get the passive of 30% damage reduction from deliberation. So this basically makes you really indestructible for the time being. And this works in dungeons, trials, it doesn't matter. It helps you just restore resources. This build does have some magicka resource issues, but not to a major degree, so this comes in handy for that. Next up, we have Northern Storm. This is very, very important. You have this ability. One, while it's slotted, you gain 8% max magicka. Number two, it's a great AoE damage ability that reduces the movement speed of your enemies by 70% while they're in the circle. And the circle does move with you. So it's a 10-meter radius around you, and it travels with you. But on top of that, it also gives you and your allies 30% damage reduction. Again, reducing the damage you take. This stacks really well with that ability of minor maim and the weakening enchants. It basically reduces most damage in most dungeons to nothing. Alright, moving on to the back bar. On the back bar, we have Inner Beast. This is your taunt. This is what you're going to be using most of the time to taunt your enemy. No, it does not apply Major Fracture. That's why we are using the gear set we are. The Night Mother's Gaze is to apply that Major Fracture. But it is a good taunt, and it does have a great synergy for your group. Next ability we have on our bar is Blue Betty. This gives you magic recovery over 27 seconds. It's really nice. It's really good. It also removes negative effects, which is good for you as a tank. The next ability we have on our bar is Green Lotus. This is here not only for the major savagery, but it also gives you a good heal for you and your allies. Next up, we have Ice Fortress. Another great ability for you because it gives you major reward, major resolve, but it also gives you minor protection for the duration. So for 24 seconds, not only do you get 5,280 magicka or physical and spell resistance, you also get 8% damage reduction along with your 6% as a Nord. Moving on, we have Inner Light here. This gives you, basically it's here for the max magicka, because when you swap bars, you don't want to lose a huge amount of magicka. And with Northern Storm being on the front and this being on the back, if you swap bars, it drops to like 16k. So having this here helps you maintain that magicka, and it gives you decent spell crit on the back bar. So when you swap bars to cast your other abilities, if your two ice abilities are going, they will get a greater chance of critting. Next up, we have Aggressive Warhorn. We have this here for certain reasons. This gives your group max magicka, max stamina, minor toughness, increasing health, magic, and stamina by 10% for 30 seconds. It also grants your group minor force, and it also applies to you because you have a greater crit chance now. So that 9.5 seconds of 15% critical damage also applies to you. Alright, and that is our skills. So moving on to our CP. Starting with the red tree, we have 66 Ironclad. This reduces damage taken from direct damage attacks by 22%. Now, if you guys don't know, that 8% damage reduction we get from Northern Wind, or from our Frost Cloak, and the 6% we get from being a Nord does not apply to this particular skill. It actually applies to these two, Hardy and Elemental Defender, which we both have 56 in, to give us a 12% damage reduction. So we actually get a 26% damage reduction right out the door for being a Nord and a Warden, and having our Frost Cloak up and having the Nord. Otherwise, we have an 18% damage reduction with those. And yes, Thick Skin and this do stack on that. The reason we only put 23 into Thick Skin is because you don't take a lot of damage over time effects in most dungeons and trials unless you're playing in the DLC stuff. And if you're playing in a lot of the DLC trials or dungeons, you will take a lot more damage over time, so you might want to make some adjustments in here when you're doing those. But if you're just playing the classic trials in Craglorn, or you're playing Maw, then you can get away with just this setup. Moving on over here, we have 40 into Bastion. This increased the effectiveness of our damage shields by 16%, and then we have 19 into Quick Recovery, increasing our healing received by 5%. We are wearing heavy armor. Yes, we do get a lot of healing received, already, but the more healing received we get, the more effective our self-heals are for us. It gives us self-reliance, more self-reliance and less reliance on the healers to keep us alive. The healer doesn't have to focus on us as much or as effectively. So I do want to talk a little bit about Bastion real quick. So I'm going to go back out here to the inventory and just show you guys. So here's the Frost Cloak, or the Ice Heart Mask, which gives you a damage shield, and it's whenever you deal critical damage. So because we deal critical damage with a lot of melee stuff, we can get this to proc quite a bit. And the more we get this to proc, the better off we are at maintaining a good amount of this damage shield. And it also does frost damage. It does 1070 frost damage to all enemies, so that kind of plays into that, and we'll get to why it does so much here in a second. So moving on to the green tree, we have 56 in the Warlord. This reduces our break free cost by 20%. We have 13 in the Sprinter, reducing our sprint cost by 8%. We have 23 in the bashing focus, because we do bash as a tank to knock enemies off balance, that kind of thing. So having that more reduced cost saves us resources, so 14% here. Moving on over here, we have 43 in Arcanist, increasing our magic recovery by 10%. 43 into Tenacity, increasing our stamina, our stamina return from heavy attacks by 10%. This helps with our two-handed. Our stamina bar barely moves, so you're not going to be burning through a lot of stamina with this build. Moving on to the final green part of the green tree, we do have 56 in the Shadow Ward, reducing our block cost by 20%. Even though we're not using Sword and Shield, whatever, we still block quite a bit. Certain attacks, major attacks, things like that, even with damage shields up, you do want to block. So this allows us to block and mitigate a lot of damage. So we want to keep that up, and we want the reduced cost in it. So next up, we have 26 in the Tumbling, reducing our dodge roll cost by 11%. Now, if you wanted to, you could take 56 out of the 56 and change it to the Tumbling to reduce your dodge roll, and make this 26 if you wanted to, because honestly with this particular build, damage reduction plays more into it with the use of damage shields than blocking does. So tumbling would be a more effective thing, just saying. Moving on to the blue tree, this is where things are going to get a little confusing to some people. We have 43 into Bless, increasing our healing done by 10%. We have 40 into Elfborn, increasing our critical damage done with magic abilities. So our ice abilities get greater critical damage, and then 43 in the Elemental Expert, increasing that frost damage by 10%. For being a Warden, we get another 6%, so we actually have a 16% frost damage increase with this build. I have 5 points into Spell Erosion, just to give me some extra spell penetration. Moving on to the middle tree, we have 40 into Master at Arms. The main reason why we have 40 here is for retaliation. Whenever you block a heavy attack, your next light attack used within 7 seconds deals extra damage. And then Reposit. Anytime you block an attack, you have a 15% chance to deal physical damage back to the enemy. It's just a nice way to get some extra damage on your enemies. Moving on to this tree, we have 43 into Mighty. This increases physical, poison, disease damage done by 10%. 40 into Precise Strikes, and you guys are going to notice I don't have anything in the Thaumaturge, and that's because none of the abilities I use are built on Thaumaturge. So there's no reason besides the Brawler, and there's no real reason to have any points in here. So we put 40 into Precise Strikes, giving us critical damage and critical healing. This only works on the Blossom for the healing, and the critical damage is on any light attacks, heavy attacks, and the Brawler ability we use. Next up, we have 6 in Piercing, giving us increased physical penetration. And that is it for our CP. So as you guys can see, the build is really well rounded and really well laid out. But again, like I said, you do have some issues with the Magicka, because you do use quite a bit of Magicka abilities with this. And without having any way of getting return on it, it can be kind of hectic. So I'm just going to show you guys how this build works a little bit. And then I'm going to take it into one of the trials and show you how that. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and buff up. Going to taunt the enemy. And we get 16 seconds on our taunt. So we want to kind of make sure that we try to keep as much of that up as possible. And as you can see, this build, you just basically light attack most of the time, because you're going to want to get that Ice Heart to proc. And the only time you're going to be using taunt is when you're tanking anyways. Now you can see we're down low on resources. We can either use Meditate, this and get our resources back, or we can actually pop a potion and get a lot of resources back. So you have quite a bit of ways of keeping your mitigation. Now here we are using the Northern Wind. When I use Northern Storm, sorry, I don't use any other abilities because I don't need to. Any of these other ice abilities and stuff, so. And for some reason I'm having a bad time getting my Ice Heart to proc. But if you look, I'm going to back away here in a second and let you guys see for yourselves. You'll see that Night Mother stayed proc quite well. So let's see debuffs. So Major Fracture was up 98% of the time. That's fairly well. Our Taunt was up 52% of the time. That's because I wasn't activating it a lot. Not as much as I should have been. But as you can see, our heavy attacks doing decent amount of damage. Gripping Shards, Arctic Blast, Light Attack, Brawler, Ice Heart, all do decent amount. I mean, we're not being DPS. We're here to tank, but it does make this build really well at solo play as well. So you can take this out in the world and solo play with it. So let's go ahead and take this over here to our favorite, my favorite trial. You'll run around in for this. Another reason why I chose this house was because they put us here for the PTS cycle right now, and it also just puts me really close to the Mauve Lorcage trial. So. Now this build does work really I'll say will work really well in normal trials. Veteran trials, you might want to just clear it with your group before you try getting in to do it with this, and make sure you understand the build before you go in using it. So. But as you can see right here, like my shields are mitigating a lot of the damage. Warhorn. Warhorn's a very, very effective skill in this because it takes us up to 30k stamina, which also boosts our damage shield with the brawler thing, and it also helps us deal a little bit more damage as well with our light and heavy attacks and stuff. Like I said, you won't have to worry too much about stamina because of how the build works. Like, it's got only one stamina ability really being used, but we use a lot of more magic with this. You could switch this around if you wanted to, but honestly, that damage shield that the brawler gives you is really good when you have more stamina and weapon damage built into it. So this also allows you for a lot of dodge rolling, which can work out for you. But as you guys can see, this build does work. It does have, like I said, some magic issues. You kind of have to really manage that magic really well to make it something worthwhile. But the other reason why I went with the range taunt being stamina is because that way I could use it on multiple targets. Like here, I can taunt that person, and this person if need be, to pull the pressure off the other tank for a little bit. The other nice thing about having stamina abilities is I can use those stamina abilities inside of the magic negation pool, and then when I get out I can use my magic stuff. But I'm not gonna sit here and fight these guys. I'm just showing you guys how well this build can actually work. We're just gonna go jump off the edge. All right, Voice Shrine. But that's pretty much it for this build, guys. I hope that you guys understand why I made it with the two-handed now and can see why it works. It can work really well in certain situations. In not all trials will this build work. So I'm just letting you know that now. It will not work in all trials, but it'll work in most. Just like it will work in most dungeons, but not all dungeons is it perfect. There are some dungeons where you can have some issues, like Ruins of Mazatoon. Mainly Ruins of Mazatoon is the only one where I have issues with this. You might have a little bit in some of the other ones, but not too much. If you know how to manage your resources, this build works out really well. So that's it for the Deathswind. I hope you guys like it. If you do, you guys can hit that like button. If you guys want to see more builds by me, you can hit that subscribe button. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye.